This week, I am excited to do something a little bit different with my review of the 2019 remake of The Lion King, because usually I refuse to include spoilers unless the movie is so bad, and I will always warn you. But the thing about the 2019 version about The Lion King is that it is almost a shot-for-shot remake of the 1994 version. So if you have not seen the 1994 version, then you should probably tune out now and go watch that. That's going to be the gist of my recommendation, is that go watch the 1994 version instead. But I do want to talk about the differences between the two. So this is going to be full spoilers. I'm going to go into the whole thing. Again, if you haven't seen it for some reason in the last 25 years, or you weren't shown it as a child, which I'm very sorry for you then if you were not, tune out now and go watch that version instead. So let's get into it. First of all, I want to point out very clearly from the start that calling this a live action remake is absolutely incorrect, because there's nothing live about this. These are all CG creatures. So this is a 3D animated film. So it's a 3D animated remake of a 2D animated film, but it is not a live action remake. It is directed by Jon Favreau, who did The Jungle Book for Disney. And look, the technological achievements are very impressive. There's no denying that basically this looks like a National Geographic documentary-ish, almost. Not quite, but it looks very beautiful. The animals look pretty accurate. I don't necessarily know exactly what all of these animals look like in real life, but the rendering is very realistic. So kudos on the technological achievement. The biggest issue with this is that the fact that the original story, pretty damn good. It's also a buttoned-up 90-minute film, the 1994 version. It is fun. It is fast-paced. The songs are amazing. And thankfully, in the 2019 version, they were smart and did not mess with the songs. Good call on their part. They did add a song from Beyonce. Okay, fine. Can't fault them. But that only adds, 3 minutes to the film? Somehow, Jon Favreau managed to drag out The Lion King into a 2-hour film. But all the additional content is so unnecessary. I was literally watching, I was like, I am baffled. And honestly, this film just feels motivated by greed. What are you, okay, maybe you're trying to win a VFX Oscar, but the 1994 version is just so good. And I was rewatching the 1994 version after, and I was just like, oh my God, what have they done? So the CG animals, very impressive, but the challenge is that these animals, Serengeti animals, are not that cute. They're not the cutest things in the world. They definitely tried to, show a bunch of cuter ones, but they are not particularly appealing animals. The other huge challenge is that they are not emotive. If you go back and look, basically all the lions, everyone in the original one, had eyebrows. And the importance of I've never seen a movie highlight more the importance of eyebrows in terms of expressing emotion. Because in this, because they are trying to keep them constrained to the kind of realistic way an animal would talk, see, that's already ridiculous, but because they are trying to keep them somewhat realistic renderings, etc., they don't really have eyebrows, and so mostly it's just Muppet mouth flapping to lip sync and then raising the little ridges above their heads, which is nowhere near as emotive as the fake lion eyebrows or the fake warthog eyebrows in the 1994 hand-drawn version. Basically what it ends up looking like is Mr. Ed lip sync, where they would feed the horse peanut butter or whatever it was, and his mouth would just flap constantly, and it wouldn't quite necessarily line up. The other thing is that because they are more realistic, in quotes, it's hard to distinguish who is who. Obviously, you're going to know who Timon is. Obviously, you're going to know who Pumbaa is. But when it comes to the lions, I'm like, how is Sarabi different from Nala? Really tough to tell, especially at night. Mufasa and Simba, when they're grown, don't look that different, but they also don't look I'm like, oh, this is a younger version. This is the, young adult version of Mufasa, and he will eventually grow into the strong version. And especially Scar, sure, Scar is still skinny, but I love that Scar was dark, and, you could tell he was a bad guy, basically, in the original. And it's just not as appealing. It's not as clear visually. It's not as fun. It's not, it just takes away from the entire experience. There are so many things they did that just took away from the entire experience in an attempt to make this a more realistic looking film, but then also a shot-for-shot remake. I'll give them a compliment. The casting of the comedians in this film was probably one of the best additions and one of the things that changed up the most. So let's also talk about the cast. You've got Donald Glover as adult Simba and Beyonce as Nala. Okay, fine. Nobody's going to argue with those casting choices in terms of talent. I think one of the smart things that they did, and the one places where it's okay, these lines are different from the last time. They are not necessarily different scenes, but a few of the lines are different. They've been updated a bit, is that they cast a bunch of modern comedians to play the roles of Timon and Pumbaa and Zazu and all the hyenas. And so there are a couple new bits there that I laughed a lot at. Billy Eichner and Seth Rogen are Timon and Pumbaa respectively. I think they were probably the most interesting addition. But then I went back and I was watching the original. I was like, no, these guys were great too. Like, the only reason that I think that they are the highlight of the new version, the Timon and Pumbaa, is because they were, one, the highlight of the original version, and two, like, they are one of the most different things, but it's not that different, and so you're looking for something, like, fun to glom onto, and those two end up being it. So I will give them credit for at least letting the comedians, or writing well for the comedians. Keegan-Michael Key and Eric Andre as two of the hyenas definitely get a few fun, buddy, like, ridiculous moments, but all these beats, I'm like, this was not necessary. This is just adding time to this film that didn't need time added to it. And the other challenge is you've got a bunch of people who cannot sing. So there's a lot of sing-talking in this. Obviously, Beyonce can sing. Beyonce can sing better than anybody. But Donald Glover can obviously sing. But like Seth Rogen and Chiwetel Ejiofor can't really sing. And that's okay. They're not supposed to be singers. And I get that. But what is weird is that Disney doesn't get them like a voice double for those moments that they really do need to hit those notes. It would have been fine to transition from Seth Rogen's sing-talking into some like beautiful musical note. Like there would have been no problem with that. But I don't know why they chose to commit to this weird sing-talking thing. And then you've got Chiwetel Ejiofor as Scar, who does a fine job, but he cannot sing. And it was just sad that in, Be Prepared, which has got a great kind of like solo moment in it, it's just kind of sing-talking through the whole thing, but it doesn't land as well as it does in the original. And again, I'm going to keep saying in the original, but that's the problem. This movie does not do enough to distinguish itself from the original, and therefore it sets itself up for these comparisons. You also got Rafiki, which is like, okay, fine, whatever. They don't give him a stick until later. It's a little unintelligible. It's also weird. Also, I'm sorry, my CMA pointed this out. None of that anything has genitals, which, I don't want to see that. In a 2D film, you don't even think about it. There's just some shots where I'm like, oh, this is like a neutered / castrated / like Ken dolled lion here. It's the same thing they do for like the Planet of the Apes films, the same thing, whatever. Like obviously they're not going to show animal junk in a Disney movie for kids, but it is just a little weird because the animals do look so real that you're like, some things, oh God, what's missing? I digress. Rafiki is changed up a little bit. He doesn't have a stick, which was fun. He's slightly less intelligible in this one. I'm not sure why. It's kind of a bummer, but all right. So then we've got Alfre Woodard as Sarabi, and then the one role that they could not recast, and that is James Earl Jones as Mufasa. All credit where credit is due. James Earl Jones is the perfect Mufasa, and they would have actually been very dumb to recast him. But the line reads are almost exactly the same, and I'm like, did they just go into the archives and just dump in the original files? Because if you matched it up, I'm pretty sure it would be exactly the same. So no complaints there necessarily, because it was a perfect performance the first time around. And they thankfully, again, kept the music pretty much the same. There's the addition of the Beyonce song. There's a couple, like, little bit of updates here and there. Obviously, the new people are singing, but still Elton John and Tim Rice. So smart move on that part. This is the thing. So, like, we opened on The Circle of Life, and it is a shot-for-shot remake. It's a great song. It's gonna get the soundtrack's gonna get stuck in your head, so at least there's that. But when you do this shot-for-shot remake, you're saying like, what? I was not creative enough to come up with something different, or I was too afraid to come up with something different. So what's the point of remaking the film then? That's my biggest question. What's the point aside from greed of remaking this film? Ugh, it's so frustrating. There are other moments. So like they do the shot-for-shot Circle of Life, and then they do I Just Can't Wait to Be King. And I was waiting, I love the ridiculous part where they're like, climbing out giraffes' necks and doing all this stuff. And it's just like weird kind of designy, abstract parts of it. And of course they can't do that because they are realistic lions, and a realistic lion wouldn't climb on a giraffe. So it's a bummer, and it just kind of takes away from it. Or Hakuna Matata, there's a bunch of fun moments in that which get cut short because you can't do that. And then one of the things that pissed me off the most that I've been thinking about nonstop since is that we get our Can You Feel the Love Tonight duet, which is, that's going to be one of the key pieces of this movie, right? You've got Beyonce singing a classic song. You've got Donald Glover singing it. The song is called Can You Feel the Love Tonight. It takes place in broad daylight. At no point does it become night. Like, you would think, like, okay, maybe at the end they're going to make it night, and then it's like, oh, it's, the evening piece, blah, 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 blah. Nope. Totally takes place during broad daylight. And it is not that they cannot have dark or nighttime renders, because they show that later or earlier in the film. They show that, like, no, it's fine to have them, like, at night. They're like pretty visible and stuff like that, and you've only got 2 lions in the scene. It's not like my complaint earlier where it's like, if you have the pack of lions, I can't tell who's a lion or who's who from the pack of lions. Can you tell how worked up I'm getting on this? The one mini addition that they added in terms of plot that like added but didn't add to it is there's this whole like subplot or additional plot where they like more directly address Scar's like, hey Sarabi, be my wife, or I'm gonna keep letting the hyenas like destroy everything, which is kind of unnecessary. This movie does draw a lot from Hamlet, so in that case, like, yeah, okay, you're going back to the roots there, but it was implied in the original one, or it's just not necessary for Scar's motivation. Scar's motivation is he wants to be king. Okay, great. We don't need more than that. Like, that's a pretty big motivation. Oh, the other important scene I do want to talk about is, it's a sad scene, but it's Mufasa's death scene. Again, I did mention there'd be extreme spoilers, right? Again, if you haven't seen the Lion King original one by now, what happened to you? Please, oh my God, I'm so sorry. But the Mufasa's death, I remember, it's just such like a traumatic moment as in your childhood and whenever you saw the Lion King start. And for some reason, this does not feel dramatic. It does not feel suspenseful. One, you know what's coming. I mean, but two, even again, I will keep citing this. I was watching the animated version, the original animated version. I was like, I know what's coming, and I'm still sad. Part of the challenge was, again, going back to, hey, you've got these realistic live action-y looking animals. The stampede is not intimidating because they're keeping all the wildebeest away from each other to a degree because that's how wildebeest would run. And I just remember in the original, it's like a cascade, a waterfall of these wildebeest coming over a very steep cliff, and it's just a sea of them, and you're terrified for them. And this, you're like, oh no, there's a bunch of things kind of running together. He would have been fine. Like, what the heck? It's moments like this that just take away from such a classic film. It's such a bummer. And again, this film just drags on. I was so frustrated. Like, the scene, if you remember when, a tuft of Simba's hair goes through, like, the world and gets to Rafiki, and it's that moment where everyone thought it spelled sex in the leaves, but it actually says SFX. That scene is, 30 seconds in the original one? In this one, it's like a 3-minute Rube Goldberg of the Serengeti of how a tuft of hair would get to Rafiki. Like, this thing does this and eats it and then poops it out, and then a dung beetle brings in this and that. I was like, how is this adding to the story? Like, yes, I get that you are trying to make this a slightly more realistic movie about talking lions, but it's not necessary to show us like a more, quote, realistic way that a tuft of hair would survive that long. Also, it would not survive that long. I will give my MVP award of this to Billy Eichner because I think he had the funniest moments. He can actually sing. I don't know if it was the writing was for him or it was ad-libbed, but he definitely was probably the best addition to this in a movie that did not need any additions. Aside from that, this movie is unnecessary. I am sad for anyone who grows up with this as their Lion King, and I hope to God that every parent out there, instead of going to this movie, just goes and finds a copy of the 1994 version and shows it to their kids. Because this is not better. The artistry isn't better. It is in terms of CG stuff, but there are plenty of other impressive CG movies. So why remake this one? The emotion definitely gets diluted by the lack of like mobility and animation of their faces, etc. And it's long. Good luck sitting through this. The best parts are the music. Fine. Go watch the original one and then listen to Beyonce's new album. Like, that's the solution for this. And it's going to save you a lot more money because God knows how much it's going to cost to take, like, a pack of children, if you have them, to go see this movie. Or to take yourself. It costs a lot to see movies these days. And I'm always thinking about, like, hey, would I really spend money on this? And the answer is no, I would not have spent money on this. I'm upset because I also think it's probably still going to make a stupid amount of money and continue to just pillage their stockpile of existing intellectual property. The thing I love about The Lion King, it was sort of original at the time. Again, stolen from Hamlet. And I cannot believe I'm going to defend some of their other live-action remakes, but at least it's like, all right, when it's a live-action remake, when it was Beauty and the Beast, yeah, there were actual people in it, so it was live-action. When it is Maleficent, which is not a remake, but just a, taken from an existing property or story that they've told, at least it was like new content. At least it was like something that we weren't necessarily familiar with. It was a backstory. Was it a good backstory? Absolutely not. But was it a backstory? At least with The Little Mermaid, it's gonna be live action. But with this, for these kind of like this, the way that this was just almost one-to-one was so frustrating and unnecessary. And I really hope that they do not continue on this path, but I don't see a lot to stop them from continuing down this path. The good thing is there are only a few more movies that are just animals, so hopefully they can't do this to that many more classics, but I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to give this remake 1 out of 5, but I'm going to go back and remember that The Lion King gets 5 out of 5, so 1 out of 5 for 2019, 5 out of 5 for 1994. Like, the fact that you couldn't improve on it in 25 years, and that it shouldn't have even been attempted, is disappointing. And I think, honestly, 1 out of 5 is probably being generous because the best parts of this are just straight up ripped off from the 1994 version. So that's The Lion King 2019. Take what you will from that. I truly hope that you... There's a chance that, like, this has now piqued your morbid curiosity and you're going to go see it, but don't say I didn't warn you.